Jake Burkhouse here with Mead Advisors, and today we have with us Linda Crane from the Crane Law Group. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Jake.
How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good, good. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
So, Crane Law Group, why don't you tell us and our audience a little bit about Crane Law Group, and then I also understand you have a consulting group as well.
That's true. Crane Law Group is my law firm. Crane Solutions is a consulting practice that I also formed. I formed both about 12 years ago when I decided I wanted to practice law more. I had been a law professor for 13 years at that time, and I had gotten my last promotion to full professor in 2000. And I decided that I just really hadn't practiced as much law as I wanted to. I didn't know any full-time law professors who practiced law, though. And so, I just struck out, and I became a counsel at a firm that did estate planning, because estate planning is the area of law that I decided I really wanted to go toward.
Okay.
I had taught property law and commercial law a lot at John Marshall. I was at the John Marshall Law School for 25 years. I just retired this past August, and in order to practice law full-time finally. But for the last 12 years, starting in 2002, I did it on a part-time basis while I still taught full-time. And I just really realized that to a great extent, the expertise that I had in the commercial and business areas and property also sparked some desire in me to offer legal services that I thought were needed but not generally available to certain communities, especially communities of color and women. Insofar as I was badgering lawyers at the bar associations, because part of a law professor's job description is community service.
Sure.
And one of the things we do is we have this bully pulpit because we have lifetime tenure.
Okay.
And so we get to talk about things in ways that other people just cannot because they're worried about keeping their jobs. And so I use my bully pulpit a lot to, criticize other lawyers for not caring enough to offer the sorts of business planning and tax planning services that small business owners in our communities needed. And then I realized after years of doing that the people who were passionate about police brutality and other kinds of very needy and worthy subjects were spending their time working on those subjects and the problems in those areas.
Sure.
I was passionate about something else, and if I were passionate about it, I should do it.
Right.
And so I just decided to, as they say, walk the walk, in addition to a lot of the talking, that was just constant, not only in terms of speaking to bar associations and community groups, and but also writing law review articles, sort of, describing problems and so forth. I just got to the point where I wanted to roll up my sleeves and go out into the community in Chicago and practice law and offer those services, so that's what I do. I also did think about the marketing aspect of it in terms of what area of law to go into.
Sure.
I wanted to go into an area where I thought there would be a large amount of demand by baby boomers.
Sure.
I figured, why start a business
Right.
in 2012 that baby boomers don't need
Exactly.
or won't need?
Right.
And so I thought of estate planning and helping small business owners,
Awesome.
where I believe that through the lack of good legal advice, a lot of small businesses fail to grow to their potential. They fail to be properly transferred through succession planning by the founders. And other things such as overpaying taxes as a result of not taking advantage of tax-focused strategies that they're eligible for. But the IRS is not going to send you a refund for something that you were entitled to had you filed the proper form for it. The way it will send you a refund for your overpaid income tax. It's not going to do that.
Right.
And so I had a good business reason I felt for choosing that area of the law, but I also felt that there was a big need for it.
Sure.
And I've only been made more convinced since my 12 years of practicing in the area that that's true and still is true.
Okay. And can you tell our audience really what makes you unique as far as Crane Law and Crane Law Solutions? What do you feel it makes you unique in the industry?
Well, I just think that as a result of having been a law professor for 25 years, I and practicing in an area that's somewhat complex,
Sure.
but that people can't walk away from because they need it. So a lot of things that busy people are not that interested in, they can just walk away from because it doesn't capture them. Well, talking about planning trusts and writing wills and powers of attorney and HIPAAs and
Sure.
posts and all these things are not optional for people. So they would love to walk away from it, but they can't. In fact, no one really wants to talk about it, but they have to talk about it. And yet it's complicated. It's very, very complicated. There's nothing simple about it. Even a lot of lawyers find it very complicated.
Sure.
And as a law professor, I'm very good at explaining things. So it has come in really handily for me with my clients, to know how to convey information that may be difficult to understand by breaking it down into understandable terms and definitions. And you may know that lawyers use analogy a lot.
Sure.
So, find ways to compare one thing that is harder to understand to something that you do understand better.
Right.
And so I do think I use a lot of, my teaching abilities and experience with my clients in ways that are very welcomed by my clients. I even have a lot of elderly clients.
Okay.
And elderly clients also are particularly accustomed, as they've gotten older, to people not being patient with them and necessarily taking the time and effort to truly go into detail and explain things to them in ways that, frankly, when they were younger, was what they were accustomed to.
Sure.
And so with my elderly clients, I particularly enjoy their response to the time I take with them, and I enjoy doing it, and then you start seeing the light bulbs go off, and then
Sure.
what happens too is, when we're talking about very intimate matters, they're those intimate family matters. In fact, in many ways, look at my law practice is not really just about estate planning or probate administration, but rather as a family office. The sort of family office services that usually are reserved for families that have $300 million or more,
Right.
I provide to families that have, $0 to $5 million.
Right.
Or much less than $5 million on average, I would say. And because it's something that I really enjoy doing. So it's easy to sort of characterize a lot of the work according to established labels such as estate planning, probate administration, trust administration, asset protection strategies for small business owners, through creation of mechanisms that, based on their goals and exposures to risk, are available to minimize those risks. But then there's this category of work that I find myself doing that really came into focus for me when I was working with elderly clients a lot for the first times, which are sort of just general family related troubleshooting, like stuff that one or two members of the family are staying awake at night over, that the rest of the family doesn't even know about. It's not life or death,
Sure.
but there's usually, and very often there's a legal solution to it. Sometimes there's not a legal solution, but there's a troubleshooting solution. There's a solution.
Right.
One of the things I love about my work is that there's always a solution. There's really always a solution.
Sure.
And I love that.
That's
I
awesome.
cannot change certain things. I can't change the fact that we're all mortal, that we're all
Right.
dying a little bit every day.
Right.
We're all getting older a little bit every day. I can't turn you from being poor to wealthy.
Right.
But usually, to the extent that there is an articulable problem, there's a problem that we can talk about, that we can identify. And sometimes it's hard to identify it. It's not that that's the very first thing that happens. The first thing that happens is that I get people to trust me,
Sure.
so that even if at the end of our engagement, they're still not sure they totally understand all of the nuances or even the big picture in some ways,
Sure.
other than that they knew they had a problem, now they don't.
Right.
They understand that they trust me.
Sure.
And one of my favorite mechanisms, for instance, is the family meeting. I love to hold family meetings.
Okay.
So especially if there's some discord among a leading member of the family or someone who's been put into a position to make decisions, and the rest of the family who may feel that they don't know whether they can totally trust that this family member understands everything well enough to explain it to them. Not that they don't trust them, to be honest, but just the level of trust that it takes to navigate
Sure.
these sorts of family problems, especially if someone has died or if there's money to be distributed, money involved, or assets, personal property. It's the bane of a lawyer's existence, you know.
They definitely need to trust you. On those
They
cases.
need to trust me. They need to trust me. And so what I do is I bring the family together and I explain to them. I usually always represent the estate
Sure.
or the bigger group as opposed to an individual, unless there's a disgruntled individual who actually has hired me,
Okay.
which does happen. But generally speaking, if I'm representing the group, then I can assure each member of the group that I will always explain everything to them, even though I may be communicating more frequently with the person who's been assigned the role of the administrator or the executor or the trustee or the agent under the power of attorney,
Sure.
whatever their, respective role may be.
Okay.
And that's very gratifying.
Yeah, sounds like it. And Meet Advisors, we're all here, to build relationships, to network. How would you say building relationships has helped you evolve in your business?
Well, for one thing, when I started my business in 2002, I was still teaching law school. In fact, I was an associate dean for a few years during that period at John Marshall, from like 2004 to 2007. I was the associate dean for faculty development, and so I had a full-time administrative position, which was more time-consuming than my teaching responsibilities, which were just sort of during the school year. And I was always very discreet about the fact that I was practicing law. I always felt that it made my teaching better. I certainly felt more engaged with my students. I always felt that I was able to start talking more. I didn't do any advertising. I really tried to be discreet about it.
Sure.
And plus I didn't have a lot of time, so I had as much business as I pretty much could handle. All of it came through referrals. My entire practice in the last 12 years has come from people who know me or who've heard that I was practicing law and were curious about what I was doing,
Sure.
and who referred other people to me. Every single penny. I was a counsel at 2 firms, and I still brought in all the business that I did then. I've benefited from the relationships that I had from a lifetime of growing up in Chicago and working in Chicago, and I think generally being highly respected and having a lot of friends who also were from Chicago and built their careers here and who become extremely successful.
Sure.
And we just sort of I have relationships are always important, and in my case I think they're in a way the reason, one of the drivers for me to go out and practice law, as opposed to deciding to go to become a law school dean, which was another option for me.
Okay.
Once I became a full professor. The typical track
Right.
for a law professor would then to seek out becoming a law school dean somewhere. And I just really was weighing, do I want to become a law school dean and possibly have to leave Chicago in order to do so? My husband's a judge here. He couldn't leave Chicago, so that was another consideration against that. But the bigger reason I chose to practice law is because the alternative for me, rather than being a law school dean that I considered so much, was developing my relationships in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
To really, sort of, because I felt a little isolated. I was in the
Sure.
ivory tower, so to speak. And to know that I knew all of these people and that there were deals being done in Chicago, there were meetings taking place, there was stuff going on. And, I really felt like this was my city. So I was
Right.
I knew I had access. I was just sort of cutting myself off from it, even though
Sure.
I was somewhere that a lot of people really would, be very, very happy to remain for the rest of their careers. That wasn't it for me. In this life, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be really the lawyer that I am now. That was what I set out to be. I didn't set out to be, a young struggling lawyer who didn't know anything,
Sure.
who was uncertain, and I wanted to be, the lawyers I saw on television
Sure.
when I was little, who
Right.
were, established and confident and
Right.
full of wisdom. And you know, I've gotten to the age where I think I can claim that.
So is there one piece of advice you could give to our audience as far as someone that is looking to start their own practice, coming up, a brand new entrepreneur? What's one piece of advice you can give them coming from your background? It seems like you could give a lot of advice in that.
I do think that I always tell, I've counseled a lot of law students and young lawyers over the years, and there are a couple of things that come to mind. One thing that I tell young lawyers who are a little unsure as to whether they can approach someone who they admire about advice or about a job offer or something like that is to ask people for something that they can't say no to.
Oh, nice.
All right? And I know based on how Chicagoans are and how our community is of lawyers and the business and commercial community, that it's a very sharing community. It's a very,
definitely.
engaged community. It's a community of people who do look for opportunities to give back, especially if they're easy enough so that it doesn't take time or money. So if a young person comes and asks whether they have 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes of your time to come and talk to you about how you became so successful in this area because I really would love to emulate you, only the biggest jerk in the world is going to say no to that.
Most definitely.
Right? Whereas if the same call led to a question such as, do you have a job opening?
Right.
It's just too easy to say no to that. Another thing is I always tell people to research the company or the firm and think about how you can fit in. Because when it comes to relationships, which is what we've already said, are so important, fit is everything.
Most definitely.
It's all about fit. And you may not be the most, apparent perfect fit.
Right.
So then that means it's up to you to learn something about the culture of the organization, to learn something about the drivers of the people there, to learn something about the way the people there like to dress. What they have, why? Because people like to work around people who don't make them uncomfortable.
Right.
It's really, really simple. So you've got to find a way to make people imagine you being a part of their group.
Sure.
Even if, again, on the surface, it doesn't appear that you have a whole lot in common.
Sure.
Fit, is really important. And then you asked me about Crane Solutions, and it didn't answer you, but Crane Solutions is a consulting practice that I started.
Yeah.
That I started specifically in order to allow me to pursue interesting projects, business joint ventures with smart people who I like who are not lawyers.
Okay. Very cool.
Pretty much.
So if we were to direct our audience to finding you, Linda, where would they find you online?
I'm at my office is Crane Law Group. It's at 55 West Monroe Street on the 36th floor, Suite 3600 in Chicago, Illinois, 60602. And my email address is lcrane, spelled C-R-A-N-E, L-C-R-A-N-E, at cranelawgroup.net.
All right, Linda, thank you so much for being on our show. Jake Burkhouse with Mabley and Mead Advisors. Appreciate your time today, and we'll see you again.